Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to sketch out human history from a totally different kind of mind-bending perspective. We're talking data storage, crisis management, and basically survival. We're going to answer a really surprising question: why couldn't ancient humans afford to lose their grandparents? Get ready, because the answer completely reframes how we view human progress, getting older, and, well, the very reasons why you and I are even alive today.
So, I want you to imagine something for a sec. What if your phone just died tonight, and literally everything on it was gone forever? Your photos, your contacts, your notes, the whole shebang. You'd probably feel sick to your stomach for, what, a day? But then you'd rebuild it. You'd pull from a cloud backup, grab some old screenshots, have friends text you your photos back. Now take all of that away. No cloud, zero digital copies, no writing of any kind. Nothing your family knows exists anywhere in the world except inside the minds of a few older relatives. It's crazy to think about, right? In a world before writing, the only place vital survival information existed was inside, well, 2 or 3 human skulls sitting around a campfire. We're talking about knowing exactly where the emergency water is when the river dries up, or knowing which berries are toxic in the fall but totally safe to eat in the spring. Those skulls belonged to the absolute oldest people in the group. Sure, they couldn't run fast, they couldn't hunt, and they definitely couldn't carry heavy loads, but they were humanity's original hard drives. And because there was absolutely no backup, when they died, the file didn't just get corrupted, it got permanently, irrevocably deleted.
And we actually know exactly what that deletion looks like, because it happened in recorded history. Take the really tragic case of the polar Inuit in northern Greenland. Back in the 1820s, this terrible disease swept through the community, and it disproportionately killed off the elders. Within a single generation, the survivors completely forgot how to build a kayak. Just let that sink in. People living on an Arctic coast forgot how to build a boat. They lost the specialized Leicester fish spear, they lost bow and arrow technology, and even the brilliant heat-trapping design of their snow houses. For 40 years, they lived this much poorer, narrower, hungrier life, and they didn't reinvent a single one of those items until a neighboring group finally reintroduced them decades later.
So for almost the entire history of our species, getting old just wasn't natural. Barely anyone did it. But then, right around 30,000 years ago, everything flips. Boom. There was this sudden longevity revolution. Suddenly, grandparents were everywhere. And at that exact moment, humans start doing things they had literally never done before. They're painting on cave walls, sewing fitted clothing with actual needles, making jewelry, burying their dead with gifts. I mean, after 300,000 years of almost zero technological change, a few people simply started living long enough to talk and teach.
Now, you might be wondering, how do we actually know this? Well, it comes down to a metric that is almost stupidly simple. Teeth. Teeth wear down as you use them, kind of like the tread on a tire. Archaeologists looked at thousands of skeletons spanning millions of years of human evolution, basically sorting the dead into young and old just based on this tooth wear. And the brutal answer they found: for most of history, getting old was not a normal stage of life. It was incredibly, insanely rare luck. That is, until that flip 30,000 years ago, when that luck turned into this massive evolutionary advantage. Okay, so why was having elders such a huge advantage? Because underneath all of human survival sits one recurring, absolutely critical life or death question: when do you move? Think about it. If a family stays too long in a drought, the food runs out and they starve. If they move too early, they burn vital calories for absolutely nothing. And if they move in the wrong direction, well, everybody dies. Knowing the answer to this question during rare, generational catastrophes required a type of knowledge that simply could not be rushed. The animal kingdom actually illustrates this concept brilliantly. During this severe 1993 drought in Kenya's Amboseli Park, researchers noticed something fascinating. Some elephant families stayed put and starved, while others left the park and walked to water. And guess what? The ones that left were led by the oldest matriarchs. They were the only ones old enough to have lived through the last catastrophic drought decades prior. They remembered exactly where the emergency water was. The young matriarchs didn't leave because they literally had no idea there was anywhere else to go. Which brings us to a harsh but honestly fascinating reality. We usually assume ancient tribes kept elders around out of pure sentiment or, family loyalty. And while that might be true emotionally, it is definitely not why it worked biologically. An old person costs calories. Over thousands of generations, a group carrying a useless burden is going to lose out to a group that isn't. So if evolution decides to pay for decades of human life long after our physical peak, which, by the way, is something chimpanzees absolutely do not do, it means those elders were yielding a massive return on investment. So how exactly did they pay for themselves? Enter the grandmother effect. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes went to live with the Hadza people in Tanzania, and she noticed the old women weren't just sitting around resting. No, they were spending punishing hours in the hot sun, driving sticks into hard ground to pull up deep tubers. But they weren't even eating the food themselves. They were handing it straight to their grandchildren. Because grandmothers absorb this nutritional gap, human mothers could actually have their next child every 2 to 3 years, instead of the 5 years a chimpanzee mother waits. That subtle shift in reproduction time literally shaped our entire species. Okay, so what were the old men doing? Well, researchers tracked the net calorie production across hunter-gatherer tribes like the Aceh and the Hadza. Young men in their 20s are obviously incredibly strong, but they are barely breaking even. But men in their 50s and 60s, they were consistently net producers. They were bringing in way more calories than they consumed. You see, human food has to be intensely tracked, extracted, and hunted. Those are highly complex skills that take decades of trial and error to truly master.
But hey, food is only half the story. The other half is raw information. Along the coast of Australia, Aboriginal communities tell these ancient stories about a time when the coastline sat much, much further out. Geographers actually match these stories to the real sea level record, and they discover that these oral accounts describe the world perfectly as it looked 7,000 years ago. Guys, that is 250 generations passing down a description of a shoreline through an unbroken chain of voices. No writing, not one broken link. That is the sheer indestructible power of oral tradition.
To make sure this vital data wasn't lost in a single tragic accident, ancient humans engineered some seriously incredible redundancy into their lives. First, they distributed the library. One elder knew plants, another knew the weather, another knew genealogy. Second, they made forgetting physically difficult by encoding data into rhythm, song, and dance. I mean, you can't casually corrupt a song you've heard 400 times, right? And third, they mapped the knowledge directly onto the land itself. The land was their filing system, which is exactly why displacing indigenous people from their land tragically destroys all those memories. We often mistakenly view these elders as just passive archives, like some dusty encyclopedia sitting on a shelf. But they were deeply active decision makers. They were the forecast. An old tracker could read hoof marks to judge animal fatigue. Old women held massive kinship maps in their heads to repair feuds. They were diplomats who secured trading partners over 40 years, ensuring their small group of 20 people had refuge on neighboring lands when a localized famine hit. Which brings us right back to that core life or death question. When do you move? Almost every catastrophic failure in a foraging life comes down to timing. Deciding correctly requires knowing what a landscape looks like not in a normal year, but in a horrific, once-in-a-generation bad year. The hardest skills in that ancient world were never purely physical. They were the judgment and crisis management that only someone who had lived through a catastrophe could possess. This deep reliance on the elderly reveals an incredible history of human empathy. We can call it the compassion continuum. We know that when a group loses its teachers, like when rising seas isolated Tasmania 12,000 years ago, their toolkit shrinks and they literally lose technology. But to stop that from happening, our ancestors made caring for the vulnerable a default survival strategy. And we can trace this instinct way back, far deeper in time than you might ever imagine. The proof is written directly into ancient bones. Over in Iraq, archaeologists found a 40,000-year-old Neanderthal man who had been terribly maimed, blind in one eye, a withered arm, a limping leg. Yet, his bones showed years and years of healing. In Georgia, they found a 1.8 million-year-old skull that was completely toothless, its sockets healed over long before death. Think about that. In a world without cooking pots or soft food, someone engaged in the grueling daily labor of chewing and softening food for these individuals for years. They did it to retain that priceless knowledge trapped inside their minds. Caring for others, that is older than our species. All of this creates a cultural feedback loop. It's the literal engine of human civilization. Once a few more people survive to age 50, those elders teach better survival skills. Because survival gets easier with better clothing or food storage, even more people reach 50. That means more teachers and less knowledge lost between generations. Longevity built culture, and culture built longevity. That continuous, spinning loop is the foundation for agriculture, writing, and even the very screens we are using to communicate right now. Today, we've supposedly solved the storage problem. We've got printed books, massive hard drives, endless cloud servers. So, by the cold logic of data storage, elders should be obsolete, right? Well, not exactly. Modern technology brilliantly stores raw facts.
but it completely fails at storing human judgment. How do you hold a family together through a terrible decade? How do you know when to leave a bad situation and when to endure it? What does a true crisis feel like from the inside, and how does it finally end? None of that digitizes well. It is still stored the old way, in people. Which leaves us with one final, deeply personal thought to take away from this explainer. You are the output of an unbroken chain. Every single ancestor you have, going back 300,000 years, belonged to a group that successfully kept its old people alive long enough to pass down their wisdom. That chain runs all the way to you right now. So I gotta ask you, who in your family is currently the last copy? What undocumented stories, what secret recipes, what hard-earned life lessons are currently living inside your older relatives, just waiting to be backed up before they're gone forever?